The rain over Philadelphia fell with a steady metallic rhythm, tapping against the storefront windows of Muller Electronics' repair shop, like encrypted signals waiting to be deciphered. Inside, under the hum of an aging bench lamp, Walter Muller leaned over the open chassis of a Zenith television set, one of thousands he had repaired over the course of 3 decades. Nothing about this job should have been unusual. The TV belonged to Mrs. Henderson, an elderly widow whose life revolved around knitting needles, crossword puzzles, and afternoon game shows. A simple tube failure, he expected. A capacitor, maybe. Something routine in a world where routine was the only protection a man like Walter had ever known. But the moment he saw the small, brushed aluminum box nestled within the circuitry, the world he had built, quiet, predictable, deliberately uneventful, shifted like a fault line slipping beneath his feet. For several seconds he didn't touch it. He simply stared. The interior of a television set was as familiar to him as his own hands. Coils wound with precision, vacuum tubes arranged in logical procession, solder lines neat and honest in their purpose. This object, however, had no place here. Smooth edges, no screws, no labels, no manufacturing stamp. A foreign body in an American machine. It didn't hum, didn't glow, didn't even pretend to belong. He pulled down his magnifying lens and leaned closer. Along one edge, barely visible beneath a thin film of dust, were faint characters. Stamped, deliberate, unmistakable. Not English. Not German. Cyrillic. A chill climbed his spine with the surety of a hand closing around it. He was no longer simply Walter the repairman. In that instant, triggered by the shape of letters he had tried for 20 years to forget, he became again Walter the refugee from Berlin, the young man who had once watched neighbors disappear under Soviet occupation, who had witnessed walls rise overnight and freedoms dissolve in silence. He knew what happened when foreign power seeped into private spaces. He knew what listening meant. He picked up the device with extreme care, turning it as one might turn a grenade whose pin might already be loose. It was heavier than it looked, a thin antenna wire wrapped around the underside like a concealed vein. No cracks, no ports, only a near-invisible seam along the perimeter. A sign that, with the right tools, someone could open it and glimpse the secrets inside. Functionally, Walter understood what it was. A transmitter, a listening device. In the newspapers, such things appeared as exotic artifacts of spy fiction, bugs hidden in embassy walls, microphones planted behind diplomatic portraits. But this wasn't Washington. This wasn't Moscow. This was a widow's living room in Philadelphia. Why? He set the device down and rubbed his palms on his rag, trying to wipe away not physical residue, but the feeling of contamination. The rain outside sounded sharper now, not soothing but insistent, like static bleeding into a channel. He scanned the room instinctively, eyes darting to shelves, to the window, to the shadows between objects. He knew, rationally, that no one was watching him in this moment. But the habits formed in Berlin never fully left a man. He sat down heavily in his worn work chair, springs groaning under the sudden weight of memory. He pulled a Lucky Strike from his shirt pocket and lit it with his battered Zippo. The flame flickered, reflecting off the metallic surface of the transmitter as though the device were watching him back. There was a path of safety available to him, simple, cowardly, seductive. Put the device back, replace the broken tube, close the cabinet, charge Mrs. Henderson $25. Let the quiet machinery of espionage continue without disruption. No FBI agents, no questions about his accent or his past, no suspicions, because suspicion, during the Cold War, was not a shadow, but a weapon. And immigrants like him were far too easy to mistake for ghosts of foreign loyalties. But deeper than fear was something older. Heavier, the memory of a country that collapsed because too many people chose not to act, not to acknowledge what was unfolding in front of them. He remembered neighbors whispering that nothing was wrong, right up until everything was. He remembered promising himself he would never again be the kind of man who looked away. He stared at the device again, smoke curling in thin tendrils above it. Information, in this era, was worth more than steel or oil or even soldiers. The Soviet Union's KGB Directorate T had become infamous for embedding listening devices in the most mundane objects: lamps, radios, ashtrays, even wooden carvings. In Washington, the FBI and NSA responded in kind, building an expanding universe of counterintelligence, wiretaps, and signal interception. The world had entered a new kind of war, one of frequencies, microphones, whispers buried in white noise. If this device was Soviet, and the Cyrillic markings made that all but certain, then someone had turned Mrs. Henderson's cozy apartment into part of their listening network, not by mistake, and not for trivial reasons. A frightening question followed. If the authorities discovered this device later, and if they learned it had passed through his shop, would they believe he hadn't installed it? Would they assume coincidence, when coincidence was the mortal enemy of counterintelligence logic? No. He had no choice. He crushed the cigarette in the ashtray and reached for the black rotary phone on the corner of his bench. The cord curled like a sleeping serpent. In a drawer beneath it lay an old phone book with greasy, worn pages. He turned to the government listings. His finger hovered only a moment before dialing. Each rotation of the dial felt heavier than it should, like turning gears that would reshape the trajectory of his life. The line rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. Federal Bureau of Investigation, a woman answered, her voice crisp and clipped. How may I direct your call? Walter swallowed. He briefly considered hanging up, but the memory of Cyrillic letters burned like a warning behind his eyes. My name is Walter Muller, he said, accent thickening. I have found something inside a television, something foreign, something I believe requires your immediate attention. There was a pause, small but telling. What sort of something? A device, Walter said, hidden, with Russian writing. Another, longer pause. Then, please hold. Static filled the line. Then a new voice, deep, steady. This is Special Agent Frank Morrison. Tell me exactly what you found. Walter took a breath and began. 18 minutes later, the knock on his locked door came. Firm, deliberate, and unmistakably official. The knock arrived exactly 18 minutes after the phone call ended. 3 sharp, measured raps that carried the unmistakable cadence of men accustomed to being obeyed. Walter felt the vibration through the soles of his shoes. For a brief second, he wondered what would happen if he simply didn't answer, if he pretended not to be here. But the moment passed. He walked to the front of the shop, flipped the deadbolt, and opened the door. 2 men in dark overcoats stood beneath the shop's awning, rain sliding off their hats in narrow streams. Their posture was straight, disciplined, radiating the deliberate calm of federal authority. One held out a leather badge folder. Mr. Muller, the taller one asked. Special Agents Turner and Hale, FBI. Walter stepped aside, and the 2 men entered the shop with a kind of controlled sweep. Not hostile, but thoroughly aware of every angle, every shadow, every line of sight. Their eyes flicked briefly over the shelves, the counter, the workbench. Not searching. Mapping. "Where is the device?" Turner asked. His tone clipped. Walter gestured toward the bench, where the aluminum transmitter still lay like an artifact from a world he wished he'd never touched. Hale approached with a slow, precise crouch, examining the object without putting a finger on it. He leaned in, eyes narrowing the moment he saw the faint Cyrillic lettering. Turner watched him. "Russian?" Hale nodded. "No question." He straightened and finally looked at Walter. "How did you come across this?" Walter explained the routine repair, the faulty picture tube, and how the hidden device had caught his eye only by accident. He tried to keep his voice steady, but his own words sounded distant and unreal, like someone else telling the story. Turner scribbled notes in a small black notebook, but his eyes never left Walter's face. "And no one else has handled it?" Turner asked. "No," Walter replied. "Only me. And I kept it exactly where I found it." "Good," Turner said, the word carrying a weight Walter didn't fully understand. Hale stepped back from the bench. "Placement is clean. Whoever installed this knew what they were doing. No damage to the TV, no interference with the internal circuits. Classic technical operations work." He pointed to a bracket. "See this? They rerouted the horizontal oscillator wire just enough to create space for the transmitter without interrupting the picture. Someone trained did this. This wasn't random." Turner turned to Walter. "Do you have any idea who might have had access to the television before Mrs. Henderson brought it to you?" "No," Walter said immediately. "She's an old woman, lives alone. I doubt anyone but her touched it." Turner's expression shifted, subtle but noticeable. "People who live alone, Mr. Muller, are the easiest targets. No witnesses, no patterns of visitors. Someone could have accessed her apartment when she wasn't home." Walter's stomach tightened. But why would anyone spy on her? Turner exchanged a glance with Hale, then answered carefully. "They might not have been spying on her. Could have been the previous tenant, or a neighbor. Sometimes, in apartment buildings, walls are thinner than people realize. Surveillance can bleed across floors." Walter's mind reeled. "Certain units, certain positions, become valuable listening posts," Hale added. "Soviet doctrine uses that principle a lot. They don't just target people. They target spaces." Walter swallowed hard. "So her home was used." "Used," Turner confirmed. "That's the right word." Hale slipped gloves onto his hands, carefully lifting the device and placing it into a small, insulated evidence container. The moment the lid clicked shut, Walter felt a strange sense of distance, as though the danger had been physically removed from the room, even though the implications still loomed heavily around him. "This goes straight to the tech lab," Hale said. "No stops, no detours." Turner nodded and turned back to Walter. "We're going to need a statement. Full details. Even small coincidences matter." Walter felt heat rise in his chest. Not anger, but fear. "I didn't do anything wrong. I just fixed a TV." Turner's tone softened slightly. "We know. But you should understand, Mr. Muller. Finding something like this, in this city, during this year, it's not small. A device like this doesn't get placed randomly, and the people who built it don't make mistakes." Walter felt the weight of the words settle inside him like cold metal. "Then what will happen?" Hale closed the evidence case and stood. "We're going to speak with Mrs. Henderson and inspect her apartment. If someone installed this, there may be more." Walter nodded slowly. "She's harmless." Turner's voice held a note of grim irony. Most of the best listening posts are. He slipped a card from his coat and handed it to Walter. The embossed lettering felt heavy in Walter's palm. Federal Bureau of Investigation. "If anything unusual happens," Turner said, "anyone asks about the TV, anyone visits the shop unexpectedly, you call us immediately. Day or night." Walter tucked the card into his shirt pocket, the weight of it pressing like a sealed fate. As Turner walked toward the door, he paused, looking back over his shoulder. "One more question, Mr. Muller. When you first saw that device, what made you call us instead of ignoring it?" Walter hesitated. It wasn't a simple question. Memories flickered. Berlin apartments where neighbors vanished, the taste of fear in the air. Men with uniforms deciding who lived freely and who didn't. People pretending not to see until seeing became impossible. Finally, he said quietly, "Because I know what happens when people look away." Turner held his gaze for a long moment, something like understanding passing between them. Then he nodded once. "You did the right thing." Rain echoed faintly against the shop windows as the two agents stepped back outside, closing the door behind them. Walter locked it again, not for safety, but from a hollow instinct. The shop felt emptier now, as if something had been taken from it. Something invisible, but vital. He walked back to the bench and stared at the empty space where the transmitter had been. Nothing in the room had changed, and yet everything had. Far beyond the repair shop's walls, an invisible grid had begun shifting, of interests, of intelligence, of nations competing in the shadows. Walter Muller, by accident and by conscience, had stepped directly into its path. And in a quiet Philadelphia apartment, an old widow sat unaware that her living room had once been part of a battle fought with wires, frequencies, and the secrets of men. The rain had tapered off by the time Agents Turner and Hale reached Mrs. Henderson's apartment building later that afternoon, but the sky remained a flat, oppressive gray, the kind of color that made a city feel watched. Philadelphia's narrow brick row homes stretched in uniform rows like silent witnesses. The building itself, 3 stories high with an aging fire escape running down its side, did not look like the kind of place where international espionage might take root. But Cold War intelligence rarely respected appearances. In espionage, the most ordinary locations often hid the most extraordinary secrets. Mrs. Henderson opened the door slowly, her frail hands gripping the edge, as if the world outside had suddenly become too heavy. Her knitted cardigan hung loosely, and her eyes widened behind thick glasses when she saw the badges. Oh dear. Did Walter say something was wrong with my television? Her voice trembled. "Ma'am," Turner said gently, "we're here to ask a few questions about anyone who may have had access to your home recently." She blinked, confused. "Access? I hardly have visitors. I'm an old woman, Agent. I don't see many people these days." Hale offered a reassuring smile. "This will only take a moment, ma'am. May we come in?" She nodded, stepping aside. The interior of her apartment was warm and meticulously tidy. Crochet blankets draped over the sofa, a framed photograph of her late husband perched on the mantel. The faint scent of lavender clung to the air. It was a room built for comfort, not conspiracy. Yet Hale's eyes moved across the space with forensic precision. In espionage, comfort was often the perfect camouflage. Turner began with simple questions. "Has anyone been inside your apartment in the past few months? A repairman? Visitors? Maintenance workers?" Mrs. Henderson pressed her palms together thoughtfully. Let me think. My niece visited in the spring, but only for a weekend. A church friend came by to drop off a casserole when I had the flu. Oh, and the landlord sent a young man to adjust the radiator. It was clanking terribly in July. Hale's attention sharpened. Did he go near the television? I suppose he might have, she said hesitantly. The radiator pipe runs behind the wall. He was back there for a while. Very polite boy. Said he'd fix it right up. Did he give his name? Turner asked. No. The landlord just said someone would come. Turner and Hale exchanged a subtle glance, one that contained far more meaning than the widow could guess. Access with plausible cover, technical skill, time alone inside the apartment. It matched Soviet infiltration tradecraft almost perfectly. Ma'am, Turner said carefully, we need to inspect your apartment. There's a possibility someone installed a device here without your knowledge. A device? She whispered. In my home? Turner nodded gently. It may not have been meant for you. Her lips trembled. The realization hit her with the weight of something deeply personal, even though she was not the target. Espionage violated space, intimacy, and trust long before it violated nations. Hale began the inspection. He moved with silent efficiency, checking corners, fixtures, electrical outlets, the baseboards beneath windows, and the walls behind picture frames. Turner checked behind the television stand, examining screw wear, dust patterns, and wiring that had been subtly repositioned. Nothing about the room seemed disturbed at first glance, but espionage rarely left obvious scars. In the kitchen, Hale paused. He leaned close to the wallpaper near the telephone table. Turner, he called quietly. Turner stepped in. Hale pointed to a faint circular smudge, barely visible, but unmistakable to trained eyes. Contact mark, Hale said. Likely from a suction microphone. Temporary placement. Someone was listening here. Turner nodded grimly. And they used the transmitter as backup. Redundancy. Mrs. Henderson's voice trembled from behind them. Someone listened. To me? Turner turned to her. We don't believe you were the target. The previous tenant may have been someone of interest. Her brow furrowed. The man before me? Quiet fellow. Worked odd hours. Wore a uniform sometimes, I think. Navy, maybe. Turner's pulse quickened. Do you remember his name? Hansen. Or Hansen, she said uncertainly. Something like that. He moved out suddenly. Silence fell over the room for a moment. Heavy, electric, conclusive. A naval technician, living in a building with thin walls. Abrupt departure. Followed by installation of a covert Soviet listening post. The pieces fit too cleanly. Hale continued his sweep. Minutes later, from the bedroom, his voice cut through the apartment again. Turner. Found something else. Turner and Mrs. Henderson followed him into the small, yellow-painted room. Hale held a slender sliver of metal between his gloved fingers, its surface etched with microscopic scratches. A window frame contact mic, Hale said. Professional grade. Removed recently. See the dust pattern? And clamp marks. He exhaled slowly. Whoever ran this setup was thorough. Turner shook his head. 3 devices in one apartment. This wasn't surveillance. It was a listening hub. Hale added, Directorate T methods match. High-level Soviet technical unit. They don't waste assets like this unless the target's important. Turner sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, absorbing the implications. Hansen's work at the naval shipyard. If he had access to classified communications, he would have been a valuable recruitment target. Mrs. Henderson stood in the doorway, clutching her shawl. Was I in danger? Turner spoke with a quiet gravity. Not physically, but your home was used as part of a bigger operation, one you had no part in. Her eyes filled with a mix of fear and violation, a feeling shared by countless innocents, swept unknowingly into Cold War currents. Hale bagged the mic fragment. "We need to track Hansen immediately," Turner nodded. "And whoever accessed this apartment, the repairman, if he was real." From the living room, Turner's radio crackled with static before a voice came through. "HQ to Turner. We have preliminary lab results. The transmitter is confirmed active. Remote activation last night. Burst signal." Turner stiffened. "They tested it after installation." "Tested it," the voice replied. "And again, an hour after it reached evidence. They were checking status. They know something's wrong." Turner lowered the radio slowly, feeling the temperature of the room shift. Hale shook his head. "So the people who planted this know we found it." Turner responded with a grim certainty. "Then they're already adjusting their operation." He turned back to Mrs. Henderson. "Ma'am, we'll assign someone to check on you. You won't be alone in this." The widow nodded, still shaking. As the agents gathered their equipment, Turner walked slowly through the apartment one more time, absorbing its quietness, its innocence, its unknowing involvement in a war fought through wires and whispers. A single hidden device in a broken television had revealed the outlines of a much larger operation, one stretching beyond Mrs. Henderson, beyond Walter, beyond Philadelphia. It was now clear. This was not an isolated act. This was a network, and the men who planted it were still somewhere in the city, adjusting, watching, listening. Turner closed the apartment door behind him, knowing the investigation had only just begun. The Philadelphia Naval Shipyard loomed against the horizon like a steel citadel. Dry docks yawning open, cranes perched like sentinels over half-completed hulls, and rows of communications buildings humming with classified activity. If espionage had touched this city, this was the nerve center. Turner and Hale arrived just after noon, carrying with them the fragment of truth uncovered in Mrs. Henderson's apartment. Inside the shipyard administration building, a civilian clerk retrieved Hansen's personnel file with an expression halfway between confusion and concern. "Petty Officer Second Class Daniel Hansen," she said, sliding the folder across the desk. "Electronic Maintenance Technician, Communications Division." Turner scanned the documents quickly. Years of service, commendations, high proficiency in signal routing, and access to restricted equipment. Hale read over his shoulder. This guy wasn't a nobody. No, Turner agreed, and that's exactly why someone might want to listen to him. The clerk hesitated. "Is he in trouble?" Hale didn't answer directly. "When did he last report for duty?" She flipped through the log. "He took emergency leave 3 months ago." Turner looked up sharply. "Approved by who?" She pointed to the signature line. "Commander Robert Keating." The two agents exchanged a glance, sharp, immediate, wordless. "Emergency leave requires documentation," Turner said. The clerk nodded. "Well, that's the strange part. It was approved over the phone." Hale exhaled slowly. "That's not procedure." "No," the clerk said, lowering her voice. "And Commander Keating has never done anything like that before." Turner felt the pieces shifting again, aligning into a darker pattern. "We need to speak with him." But Keating wasn't on base. He had called in sick that morning, an anomaly the clerk insisted had never occurred in his career. Within the hour, the agent stood outside Keating's row home in South Philadelphia. The mailbox bulged with uncollected envelopes, curtains drawn. Porch light still burning though the sun was high. Turner knocked once, twice. No answer. Hale circled to the back and found the door locked, but the frame bore fresh, splintering near the latch. "Turner," Hale called softly. "Forced entry, maybe last night." Turner joined him. Hale pressed forward, and the door gave way with a muted crack, like a secret choosing to reveal itself unwillingly. Inside, the living room seemed orderly. Too orderly. But the kitchen told a different story. A chair knocked over, a half-drunk cup of coffee spilled, a drawer left half open, as if someone had been interrupted mid-search. Or mid-escape. Turner's instincts sharpened. Keating didn't leave voluntarily. Hale moved toward a bulletin board by the hallway. "Look at this." Pinned among grocery lists and naval schedules was a photo. Keating and Hansen at a shipyard picnic, arms slung over each other's shoulders, easy smiles on their faces. "So they were close," Hale murmured. "Close enough," Turner said grimly. "This doesn't smell like random recruitment. This looks cultivated." Beneath the photo was a small, stapled receipt. Coffee shop purchase, dated 2 weeks before Hansen took emergency leave. "They met," Hale said. "Recently. Probably often." Turner studied the photo again, the ease in their expressions. Friendly colleague, mentor, handler, or co-conspirator. The line between the roles blurred quickly in counterintelligence. Hale's radio crackled suddenly. "HQ to Hale. Do you copy?" Hale lifted it. "Go ahead." Technical lab just finished Phase 2 analysis. The transmitter from the television activated again last night. 3-second burst. Someone attempted a signal check. "A second activation?" Hale asked. "Affirmative." The burst ended abruptly, likely due to device removal. "They know it's in our hands." Hale lowered the radio. Turner felt the room grow colder. "They know," Hale repeated. "And if they know, they're shutting everything down, pulling assets, cleaning trails." Turner nodded grimly. "And eliminating liabilities." He looked around Keating's kitchen. The toppled chair, the spilled coffee, the drawer left open. This wasn't a burglary. This was extraction. Or cleanup. Hale placed the photograph of Keating and Hansen into an evidence envelope. If they were compromised, we're too late. Turner shook his head. Not too late. Just behind. He turned to the clerk's earlier note in Keating's file. Recent assignments. Keating's work intersected with encrypted naval transmissions and long-range communications tests, testing protocols that would be invaluable to Soviet intelligence. A compromised officer could leak calibration sequences, encryption vulnerabilities, or ship movement patterns. Even fragments of such information could give Moscow an edge in deciphering U.S. operations. Hale voiced the fear both men felt. If KGB had access to even a sliver of naval encryption data, they'd map the rest, Turner finished. The silence that followed was heavy, strategic, national, historical. "Let's move," Turner said. "We need to get back." The Philadelphia field office was buzzing when the agents returned. Analysts hurried through hallways with files tucked under their arms. Radios crackled. Phones rang without pause. The Cold War rarely erupted in obvious ways, but sometimes intelligence work felt like standing on a fault line after the first tremor. Assistant Special Agent in Charge Lowell was waiting for them in the Situation Room, eyes hard, expression carved from stone. "Sit," he said. "We have updates." On the table lay a series of black and white surveillance photographs. Turner's breath caught. The first photo, Hansen entering a car outside a cafe, time-stamped 11 days earlier. The second, Keating, walking into a post office late at night, carrying a small brown package. The third, a clean-shaven man with a trench coat stepping out from behind a newsstand. Steely eyes, controlled stance, a ghost of a smile. Oleg Petrov, Lowell said, Soviet cultural attaché, known KGB Residentura contact. We've suspected him for years. Could never prove anything. Turner felt his jaw tighten. We can now. Lowell nodded. We can establish contact patterns. Hansen met Petrov before his disappearance. Keating delivered a package addressed to a dead man, a classic dead-drop gambit. Hale exhaled. What about the package? Gone before we intercepted it, Lowell answered. Someone collected it. Possibly Petrov's courier. Or someone we haven't identified yet. Lowell leaned forward. We've run signal analysis. The transmitter's calibration stamps match 2 manufacturing batches from Lubyanka's technical division. Same as devices seized in Chicago and Frankfurt. This is bigger than Philadelphia. Bigger than Hansen and Keating. This might be one node in a multi-city listening operation. Turner absorbed that. A network. Not a single transmitter, not an accident, not an overzealous technician. A coordinated Soviet effort to penetrate American naval communications. What's our next move? Turner asked. Lowell's expression hardened. We find Petrov. We find Hansen, if he's alive. And we determine whether Keating was coerced or complicit. And if they've already been moved, Hale asked quietly. Then we follow the signals, Lowell said, because even the best operatives leave traces. And this transmitter, he tapped the evidence photo, is the first trace we didn't miss. Turner nodded. The case had escalated from a strange discovery in a repair shop to a full-blown intelligence failure unfolding in real time. And it was far from over. Outside, the city continued its ordinary rhythm. Cars honking, pedestrians rushing, radios playing top 40 hits. But beneath that normalcy, an invisible war had shifted. Lines had been drawn, moves made, and the FBI was now in pursuit. The next morning arrived with an uneasy stillness, as though the city itself sensed something unfolding beneath its familiar routines. Traffic rolled along Market Street, tugboats groaned on the Delaware River, and life appeared normal. Yet inside the Philadelphia field office, the atmosphere had sharpened into purpose. Files lay open across tables, wall maps bristled with pins and marked routes, and every agent walked with the clipped urgency of a city suddenly repositioned on the invisible chessboard of the Cold War. Walter Miller had been asked to return to the building. He took the elevator to the same conference room where Turner, Hale, and Lowell waited. The moment he entered, he sensed the gravity in the room. Thick, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Mr. Muller, Turner said as he sat down. Thank you for coming again. There are developments you should hear. Walter folded his hands, knuckles white. I still don't understand how a broken television led to all this. Lowell answered that for him. Because the television wasn't broken, Mr. Muller. It was compromised, and you were the first person who didn't overlook the signs. He gestured to a folder filled with photographs and typed reports. This began long before Mrs. Henderson bought that television. Turner opened the folder to a profile shot of Daniel Hansen. We've traced Hansen's final months before he disappeared. He frequented several cafes known for Soviet contact attempts. His financial records show small, unexplained deposits, and surveillance photos confirm he met with Petrov, our known KGB asset. Walter studied the image. Hansen stepping into a sedan, looking over his shoulder as though expecting to be followed. So he betrayed his country? Walter asked quietly. Hale shook his head. Not necessarily. Recruitment doesn't always start as betrayal. Sometimes it starts as conversation. A friendly ear, pressure, flattery, money, ideology, blackmail. The Soviets used all of it. And Commander Keating? Walter asked. Turner pulled another photo. Keating slipping the brown package through a postal slot, shoulders stiff with stress. We believe he became compromised in a different way. Possibly leveraged through personal vulnerability or financial strain. The KGB rarely uses one method. They tailor their pressure with surgical precision. Walter leaned back, absorbing the enormity of it. And the device in the television, Lowell interlaced his fingers. Part of a larger network. Our lab confirmed it matched a series of devices intercepted in other cities. It wasn't meant to spy on your customer. It was meant to intercept nearby communications. Hansen once lived in that apartment. Gave them access to his routines, conversations, even emotional states. When he moved out, they left the infrastructure in place. It's how KGB operations survive transitions. Through persistence, Walter whispered, and because Mrs. Henderson moved in, she was caught in the middle. Unwitting collateral, Turner said. The Cold War created thousands like her. There was a long pause. Then Lowell spoke again, tone measured. We attempted to locate Hansen and Keating last night. We believe they were extracted, moved by Soviet handlers before we connected the dots. Walter's heart dropped. You mean, they're gone? Hale nodded. They vanished through the same cracks the KGB spends years carving into our systems. They're likely on foreign soil now. Or buried somewhere, we'll never find them. Turner added, but even if we didn't stop the men, we stopped the operation. That transmitter being discovered forced them to abort. Every compromised channel has been shut down. Naval intelligence is rebuilding their security protocols with urgency. Walter exhaled. It wasn't victory, but it wasn't failure either. Lowell stood and walked to the window, looking over the city. Philadelphia will never know what almost happened here. Encryption data, submarine communication vulnerabilities, fleet movement patterns. All of it was within reach of Soviet intelligence. Even fragments could have been catastrophic. He turned. And yet, this entire operation unraveled because one man refused to ignore something unusual inside a television. Walter flushed slightly. I didn't do anything extraordinary. Turner shook his head. You did exactly what most people don't do. You didn't look away. Hale added, in counterintelligence, most disasters start with small details people overlook, and most successes start with small details people notice. Lowell returned to the table. We're not telling you this to flatter you. We're telling you because there's something you must understand. He slid a small document envelope toward Walter. This is an official statement of appreciation, Lowell said. It won't be public. It won't appear in newspapers. But it acknowledges that your actions directly aided a national security investigation. Walter hesitated before taking it. The envelope felt heavy for its size. What happens now? He asked. Turner responded. The case shifts to long-term intelligence monitoring. We'll watch Petrov, track the networks he touches, use the transmitter's technical signature to identify others. One discovered node leads to many others. Hale concluded. And we make sure Philadelphia doesn't become an infiltration corridor again. Walter nodded slowly. And Mrs. Henderson? Turner's expression softened. Agents swept her apartment. No more devices. No more wiring. We'll keep an eye on her block for the next few weeks. She'll be safe. Walter looked down, speaking more to himself than to the agents. She didn't deserve any of this. No one does, Turner said. But it's the reality of the era we live in. The Cold War isn't fought on distant battlefields alone. It touches homes, radios, televisions, mailboxes. Ordinary people become pieces of a quiet war they never asked for. Walter stood. I should get back to my shop. Turner walked him to the exit. Rain had begun again, misting the pavement with a soft, silvery sheen. Walter paused at the door, glancing back at the agents. Do you think they'll ever try something like this again? Turner gave a weary half-smile. Not try, Mr. Muller. They already are. Somewhere else. With someone else. But next time, maybe another repairman somewhere, will notice a detail that doesn't belong. Walter nodded, stepped outside, and disappeared into the fog of Philadelphia's afternoon. 3 months later, a classified memo circulated through Washington. Subject: Philadelphia transmitter incident. Summary: Operation Compromised Recommendations. Expanded technical sweeps. Coordination with Navant. Augmentation of signal security protocols. In a footnote near the bottom, one line stood alone. Initiation of investigation credited to Civilian Electronics, repairman Walter Muller. It would never be spoken on television, never be acknowledged publicly. But deep inside the Federal Archives, a small piece of the Cold War's invisible history had been written, one that began with a soldering iron, a broken Zenith television, and a man who refused to let silence protect danger.